What if I told you that even after death, Charlie Chaplin found himself in the middle of a bizarre and almost comical crime? A crime so strange, it could have been a scene from one of his movies. Just months after the legendary comedian passed away in 1978, something shocking happened. His body disappeared. Yes, someone actually stole Chaplin's coffin from his grave. But this wasn't just a random act of vandalism. It was part of an outrageous ransom scheme that quickly spiraled out of control. Who would dare steal the body of one of the world's most famous entertainers? What did they hope to gain? And how did this strange story end? Let's unravel the unbelievable true story of Charlie Chaplin's stolen body. Before we dive into the topic, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Unsolved for more incredible stories from history. Charlie Chaplin was more than just a filmmaker. He was a global icon, known for his silent film character, the Tramp, who made audiences laugh and cry. After a long and eventful life, Chaplin passed away peacefully in Switzerland on Christmas Day, 1977, at the age of 88. He was buried in a small cemetery near his home, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the Swiss countryside. His family thought he would rest there forever. They were wrong. One cold night in March 1978, two men sneaked into the cemetery with shovels. These weren't professional criminals, just two struggling car mechanics, Roman Wardas from Poland and Gensho Ganev from Bulgaria. Desperate for money, they had come up with a wild plan: dig up Charlie Chaplin's coffin and demand a ransom from his grieving widow. It was a ridiculous and disturbing crime. They worked through the night, digging until they reached the heavy oak coffin. Struggling under its weight, they dragged it to their car and sped off into the darkness. By morning, the small Swiss village woke up to shocking news. Charlie Chaplin's grave was empty. The thieves were certain they had the perfect plan. After successfully stealing Charlie Chaplin's coffin, they carefully buried it in a remote cornfield, believing they had secured the ultimate bargaining chip. With the body hidden away, they made their move, contacting Chaplin's widow, Una Chaplin, with a bold ransom demand. They asked for $600,000 in exchange for the safe return of her husband's remains. They assumed that Una, still grieving, would be too heartbroken and desperate to resist. In their minds, she had no choice but to pay. After all, who wouldn't do anything to recover the body of a loved one? But the criminals underestimated Una Chaplin. Instead of panicking or giving in to their demands, she remained calm and resolute. Without hesitation, she refused to pay a single cent. She had no intention of allowing grave robbers to profit from such a disgusting act. Instead, she quietly worked with the Swiss police, who immediately launched a full-scale investigation. They tapped phone lines, monitored public booths, and set up surveillance around key areas, determined to track down the criminals and recover Chaplin's remains. Meanwhile, as soon as the crime was made public, the world reacted with shock and disbelief. News of Chaplin's stolen body spread like wildfire, dominating headlines across multiple countries. The pressure was building fast. As law enforcement intensified their search and the world's attention grew, the criminals began to realize they were in way over their heads. What had seemed like an easy way to make money was quickly spiraling out of control, and soon their foolish plan would completely unravel. The Swiss police, determined to catch the grave robbers, tapped Una's phone and set up surveillance around the village. The criminals, thinking they were smart, kept using public phone booths to avoid being traced. But the police weren't fooled. They monitored over 200 phone booths and waited for the kidnappers to make a mistake. Days turned into weeks. The robbers kept calling, demanding money, but the Chaplin family never gave in. Meanwhile, the police kept tracking them, getting closer and closer. Then after 76 days, the criminals slipped up. During one of their ransom calls, the police pinpointed the exact location of the phone booth. Officers rushed to the scene and arrested both men before they even knew what hit them. Now that the police had arrested the criminals, one major problem remained. Charlie Chaplin's body was still missing. The thieves had been so hasty in burying the coffin that they couldn't remember the exact location. All they knew was that it was somewhere in a vast cornfield outside the village. With no clear directions, the authorities had no choice but to search the field inch by inch. Officers arrived with metal detectors, shovels, and digging equipment, hoping to locate the coffin's metal handles buried beneath the soil. It was slow, exhausting work. The field stretched for acres, and each false signal meant another hole dug in vain. Hour after hour, the police carefully swept the land. Tension was high. What if they never found it? What if the body had been damaged or moved? The world was watching, and the Chaplin family desperately needed closure. Then, after several painstaking hours, one of the metal detectors gave off a strong, unmistakable signal. Officers quickly marked the spot and began digging. The deeper they went, the more certain they became. Finally, after nearly 3 months of uncertainty, they uncovered the heavy oak coffin. Despite everything, it was still intact. Charlie Chaplin had finally been found. With Charlie Chaplin's body safely returned to his family, the case that had shocked the world was finally coming to a close. Now it was time for the criminals to face the consequences of their bizarre and disturbing crime. In court, Roman Wardas and Gancho Ganev stood before the judge, their dreams of easy money shattered. What had started as a reckless scheme had turned into a global scandal, making them infamous for one of the strangest crimes in history. Wardas, the mastermind behind the plot, received 4.5 years of hard labor. The court recognized that he had been the driving force behind the plan and showed no leniency. Ganev, his accomplice, was given a much lighter sentence, 18 months suspended, meaning he wouldn't serve jail time unless he committed another offense. For a crime that involved grave robbing, extortion, and worldwide outrage, some believed the sentences were too lenient. However, the court took into account that the men had no prior criminal records and had acted out of financial desperation rather than true malice. After the long and painful ordeal, the Chaplin family was determined to ensure that such a horrifying crime would never happen again. When it was time to lay Charlie Chaplin to rest for the second time, they took extraordinary precautions to protect his grave from any future attempts at theft. This time, instead of simply burying his coffin in the soft earth, they placed it under 2 meters of reinforced concrete. This thick barrier made it virtually impossible for anyone to dig it up again. No thief, no matter how determined, would ever be able to disturb his grave. The thought of his remains being stolen and used as a bargaining tool had been a nightmare. Now, with his grave permanently sealed, they could finally find peace. In a way, it was a strangely fitting conclusion to an already unbelievable saga. Charlie Chaplin spent his life telling stories about the absurdity of human nature, how greed, desperation, and foolishness could lead people to do the most ridiculous things. And even in death, he became the subject of one last, darkly ironic story. Though the crime had shaken the world, it could never overshadow his true legacy. Chaplin was not just a man whose body was stolen. He was a genius who gave the world laughter, warmth, and unforgettable films. And now at last he would rest in peace, undisturbed for eternity. Decades later, this bizarre crime inspired the 2014 French film, The Price of Fame, which humorously reimagined the events. Even today, Chaplin's legacy lives on, not just through his films, but through the unbelievable real-life drama that surrounded his final days. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.